Princess
They're coming. We
Thera
have to
stood
go
before
now.
the full-length
I've
mirror
got you
in her
both.
private
Stay
chamber,
close.
Hurry this
watching
way.
her son's reflection
They're
as he
coming. We
pulled
have
away
to
from
go
her
now.
touch for the
I've
third
got you
time that
both.
morning.
Stay close.
The
Hurry this way.
ceremonial robes hung from his small shoulders like chains, and his ears, those delicate, expressive ears that should have stood proud, lay flat against his skull in a position she had come to dread. Distress, fear, withdrawal. Her own ears twitched with suppressed emotion as she knelt beside him, careful to keep her movements slow, non-threatening. 5 solar cycles old. So small, so frightened, and she had no idea how to reach him anymore. Kieran's sweetness, she said, her voice carrying harmonics meant to soothe, to comfort, to project maternal warmth across the empathic frequencies that connected all Volith. The ceremony is important. Grandmother expects us to... He flinched, actually flinched from the wave of calm she sent toward him, and Thera felt something crack inside her chest. Her empathic broadcast stuttered control, slipping for just a moment before she caught it, smoothed it, forced it back into the acceptable patterns of royal composure. Behind them, half hidden in the alcove near the wardrobe, 2 attendants exchanged glances. Thera's enhanced hearing caught the whisper pitched low, but not low enough. Poor child. Without his father's strength, only his mother's softness. The words landed like physical blows. Thera's fingers trembled as she fastened the last clasp on Kieran's collar, the heavy formal wear designed for a much older child, for someone ready to bear the weight of their position. Her son was drowning in fabric and expectation, and she was the one holding him underwater. "There," she said, forcing brightness into her tone. "You look very handsome, very princely." Kieran's dark eyes met hers in the mirror, those impossible swirling galaxies that marked Volith nobility, and what she saw there made her throat tighten. He was looking at her the way one might look at a stranger. No worse, the way one might look at a threat. When had that happened? When had her own child started seeing her as something to endure rather than run toward? Thera rose smoothly, muscle memory, and years of training, keeping her movements graceful despite the tremor in her hands. She adjusted her own robes, liquid mercury fabric that responded to her emotional state, currently cycling through muted silvers and grays that spoke of uncertainty, of barely contained distress. Not the colors a princess should broadcast, not the strength a mother should embody. She placed one hand on Kieran's shoulder, felt him go rigid beneath her palm. "Come, we must not keep grandmother waiting." The title sat heavy on her tongue, not your grandmother. Just grandmother, spoken with the formal distance that had infected every aspect of their lives since Kael's death. Since she had become the widow princess, the failed protector, the mother who couldn't even keep her husband alive to meet their son. The corridors of the Crystal Palace stretched before them, walls that weren't quite walls, layers of transparent material, bending light into colors that existed somewhere between ultraviolet and migraine. Thera had grown up in these halls, had run through them as a child, had trained in the warrior chambers below, and studied diplomacy in the libraries above. She knew every impossible angle, every crystalline curve, but she had never felt so lost. Kieran walked beside her, one small hand trapped in hers, and she could feel his empathic signature like a trapped bird beating against her consciousness. Fear. Overwhelming, crushing fear. She tried to send him comfort, projected waves of maternal love and protection, broadcast reassurance with every fiber of her being. His fear intensified. Thera's breath caught. She was making it worse. Everything she did to help him, every attempt to connect, every empathic caress, it was all making it worse. But that was impossible. Velith children were meant to respond to parental empathy. It was biological imperative, cultural foundation, the bedrock of their entire civilization. You felt your child's distress, you soothed it empathically, the connection strengthened. Except it wasn't working. Hadn't been working for months, and Thera had no idea why. They reached the grand receiving hall, and she felt Kieran's hand go slick with perspiration in her grip. The massive doors, grown from living crystal over centuries, parted before them with a sound like singing glass. Beyond, the assembled court waited. Queen Valere sat upon the throne that seemed to have grown directly from the palace floor, her presence filling the cavernous space in a way that had nothing to do with physical form. Even at 65 solar cycles, she commanded absolute authority. Her ears held at the perfect angle of regal composure, her robe shifting through deep purples and golds that spoke of power and certainty. Her eyes, identical to Kieran's in their swirling complexity, found her daughter and great-grandson. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 3 degrees. Thera felt the weight of that gaze, the unspoken judgment. You are failing. Your son is weak. You are inadequate. None of it needed to be said aloud. The empathic broadcast from the Queen carried disappointment like a frequency, and every noble in the chamber could perceive it. They took their positions in the formal receiving line, Thera standing with her hands still on Kieran's shoulder, gripped perhaps too tight. She could feel him trembling beneath the heavy robes, could sense his empathic signature growing more chaotic by the moment. Around them, 17 nobles in their finest ceremonial wear watched with varying degrees of interest and disdain. The human delegation was announced a formality. Thera barely registered. She was too focused on keeping Kieran still on broadcasting the appearance of control, even as panic clawed at her chest. Her son was falling apart in front of the entire court, and she had no tools to help him. Every empathic technique she'd been taught, every maternal instinct she possessed, all of it, was useless. Worse than useless. Harmful. She caught a glimpse of the humans as they entered bipedal bilateral symmetry, remarkably similar to Valith in basic structure, but utterly alien in their empathic signature, which was to say they had none. To Thera's perception, they were voids, blank spaces where emotional resonance should exist. The Terran Alliance had been pressing for closer diplomatic ties for nearly a decade, but most Valith found humans fundamentally unsettling. How could you trust beings whose emotional states were completely unreadable? Ambassador Harrison Graves led the small group, his face arranged in what was probably meant to be diplomatic pleasantness. Behind him, 3 aides, and bringing up the rear, a security officer who moved with the controlled precision of military training. Thera dismissed them from her attention. She had more immediate concerns. Elder Mordain, ancient and draped in ceremonial jewelry that chimed softly with each movement, stepped forward to begin the blessing ceremonies. His voice carried the harmonics of deep ritual words that had been spoken at formal gatherings for thousands of years. Blessings for the space between spaces. Blessings for stars unseen. Blessings for the theoretical future of theoretical partnerships. It was going to take hours. Kieran made a small sound, barely audible, but Thera felt it through their empathic link like a scream. Her hand tightened on his shoulder, and she sent another wave of calm toward him, stronger this time, more forceful. Surely if she just pushed hard enough, broadcast loud enough, he would feel her love and be comforted. His ears flattened completely against his skull, and his empathic signature spiked into something that tasted like desperation. Thera's own emotions churned beneath the carefully maintained surface of her broadcast. Shame, frustration, a growing terrible fear that she was fundamentally broken as a mother. That Kael's death had damaged her in ways that made her unable to give Kieran what he needed. That the whispered comments from attendants and nobles were right. She was too soft, too weak, inadequate to raise the future of the Vela throne. The ceremony droned on. Mordain was now blessing the concept of trade itself, a philosophical meditation that required the assembly to maintain absolute stillness and respectful attention. Thera could feel the weight of her mother's gaze, could sense the disapproval radiating from the Queen's position. And then Kieran moved. It happened fast, a sudden twist that broke her grip, a darting movement between the clustered nobles. Thera's hand closed on empty air, and panic flooded her system so completely that her empathic broadcast exploded outward in an uncontrolled wave. Several nearby nobles stumbled, overwhelmed by the sudden intensity. Kieran, she didn't shout. Princesses didn't shout, but the word came out, strangled, desperate. She pushed through the crowd, abandoning protocols, chasing her son's small form as he wove between adults with the practiced agility of a child who'd spent his entire short life trying to escape overwhelming situations. Where was he going? What was he thinking? Her empathic senses reached for him, trying to lock onto his signature, but he was moving too fast and her own panic was making it impossible to focus. She caught glimpses, his small back, the 2 large robes trailing his ears, swiveling as he searched for something. Searched for what? And then she saw it. Saw the moment Kieran's eyes locked onto his target. The human security officer standing at parade rest near one of the crystal columns that grew from the palace floor. The man who registered as nothing on empathic frequencies, a void in the ocean of emotional broadcasts that filled the grand hall. No. Oh no. Please no. Thera watched frozen in horror as her son ran directly toward the alien. Watched as Kieran's expression transformed from desperate flight to something that looked uncomfortably like relief. watched as protocol and propriety and 5,000 years of Velith cultural evolution shattered in the space of 4 seconds. Kieran reached the human, dodged around his legs, and wrapped both small hands around the man's left calf, pressed his face against the alien's uniform, went still in a way he never did with her, his empathic signature shifting from chaotic terror to something that felt quiet, settled, safe. The grand hall fell into a silence so profound that Thera could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the whisper of her robes as her hands clenched into fists, could hear the impossibility of what had just happened, echo through the empathic frequencies that connected every Velith in the space. Her son, the heir to the Velith throne, the future of their entire civilization, had just run away from her and sought sanctuary with an alien, a being who shouldn't even register as safe to a Velith child's empathic perception, a creature that every instinct should have told Kieran to avoid. And yet there he stood, clinging to the human's leg, his small body finally relaxing in a way Thera hadn't seen in months. Not since before she'd tried to become the perfect royal mother. Not since before she'd learned to broadcast the way protocol demanded. Not since before everything had gone so terribly, irreversibly wrong. The human, she could see his nameplate now. Lieutenant Marcus Reed stood absolutely motionless. To his credit, he kept his hands visible, didn't look down at the child attached to his leg, maintained a position that was clearly meant to communicate non-aggression to the suddenly very armed and very alert guards now converging on his position. Thera forced her legs to move to carry her forward through a crowd that had parted in shock. Each step felt like wading through crystal honey, slow and resistant. She was aware of every eye on her, every empathic sense focused on her signature, reading her emotions, cataloging her failure. Because this was failure. Absolute, public, undeniable failure. Her child had rejected her in the most visible way possible, had chosen a stranger, an alien stranger, over his own mother, over Velith comfort, over everything their society held sacred about the parent-child bond. She reached them, knelt beside Kieran, careful to keep distance between herself and the human, careful not to touch anything that might escalate an already catastrophic situation. 6 guards had formed a loose circle around them, harmonic staffs raised to ready positions. Those weapons didn't glow or hum. They simply existed with a weight that suggested reality itself might politely step aside if asked. Kieran, her voice came out hoarse. She cleared her throat, tried again. Kieran, sweetness, come to mother. Please, she added silently, knowing her empathic broadcast was probably screaming desperation loud enough to be heard in the lower city. Please don't make this worse. Please. Her son peeked around the human's leg. His eyes met hers, and Thera saw something in them that made her chest constrict. Not defiance, not rebellion, just exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness of a child who had been holding on too tight for too long. Why are you hiding from mother? The question escaped before she could stop it, raw and unfiltered and completely inappropriate for public consumption. Kieran's small voice, when it came, carried clearly through the silent hall. He feels quiet, Mama. Mama, not mother, the informal address she'd been gently correcting him away from for months, steering him toward more appropriate royal speech. And hearing it now in this moment felt like a blade between her ribs. Quiet, the word came out as a whisper, not loud like you, not loud like everyone, just quiet and safe. Your love is so loud, Mama. It pushes, and I'm so tired and scared, and I just wanted quiet. The grand hall might as well have ceased to exist. Thera heard the words, understood them intellectually, but her mind was refusing to process the implications. Because if what Kieran was saying was true, if her empathic broadcasts were hurting him, rather than helping, then everything she'd been doing for months, every attempt to be a better mother, every effort to strengthen their bond, she'd been overwhelming him, smothering him with the very love she'd thought would save them both. Thera looked up at the human, really looked at him for the first time. He was watching her, not Kieran. His eyes, brown, simple, unadorned by the swirling patterns of Velith nobility, held something she couldn't quite name. Not judgment, which she'd expected. Something else. Something that felt almost like understanding. His voice when he spoke was quiet, respectful, directed at her, not past her. Your Highness, I think sometimes kids just need a break from being whoever everyone expects them to be. Simple words. human words filtered through translation matrices and cultural barriers. But they landed with the force of revelation, and Thera felt something inside her chest crack open. Because he was right. She could see it and now could feel the truth of it in the way Kieran was relaxing against the stranger's leg, in the way his empathic signature had finally blessedly quieted. She had been so focused on making Kieran into what a prince should be, on teaching him to broadcast and receive empathy the way protocol demanded, on shaping him into someone who could eventually bear the weight of the throne. She had forgotten to let him simply be a child who was scared and overwhelmed. She had forgotten to let him breathe. Movement in her peripheral vision drew her attention. Queen Valeris was descending from the throne, each step measured and deliberate, the kind of movement that signaled significant royal attention. The court parted before her nobles, backing away to create a clear path. Thera's ears pressed flat. She had failed spectacularly, and now her mother was coming to witness the wreckage up close, to pronounce judgment, to assign consequence. But when Valeris reached them, stopped 3 meters away, in deference to the guards and their ready weapons, her expression was not what Thera expected. The queen's ears had swept back and upward into a position Thera had rarely seen, the stance of profound contemplation, of intellectual engagement with an unexpected problem. My grandson, Valeris said, her voice carrying the harmonics of careful thought, has never sought comfort from anyone outside the direct bloodline. Our children do not make mistakes in their empathic assessments. They cannot. It is not in their nature. They perceive emotional truth with a clarity that we adults have often lost. She turned her swirling gaze to Marcus Reed, and Thera watched the human spine straighten fractionally under that scrutiny. To his credit, he didn't flinch, didn't look away, just maintained his careful stillness and waited. So either you are the first being in recorded history to fool a Valith child's empathic instincts, Valeris continued, or you are something we have profoundly misunderstood. The queen's attention shifted to Thera, and she fought the urge to lower her gaze. Daughter, can you perceive this human's emotional state? Thera's throat tightened. She knew what her mother was asking, knew what the correct answer should be. But she also knew what the truth was, and in this moment, with her son clinging to an alien's leg and her entire worldview crumbling, she had no energy left for diplomatic deception. I cannot, mother. He is void to me, empty. I perceive nothing. And yet Kieran perceives him clearly enough to seek sanctuary. Why can your son hear what you cannot? The question hung in the air like an indictment. Thera felt the weight of it settle over her shoulders, felt the shame of it burn through her carefully maintained composure. She had no answer, no explanation for her inadequacy. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know. Valeris was silent for a long moment, her ears cycling through positions that suggested rapid thought. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of royal decree. Princess Thera, you will take custody of this human. You will learn why Kieran chose him. You will discover what our adult empathy has been trained to ignore, what frequencies we have been taught to filter out in favor of cultural conformity. You will report your findings to me in 3 solar cycles, 72 Earth hours. Do you understand? It was not a question. It was not a suggestion. It was an assignment delivered with the full authority of the Velith throne. Thera's mind reeled. Take custody of the human, study him like some kind of, scientific specimen, cultural curiosity. And she was supposed to accomplish this while also managing Kieran, while also maintaining her royal duties, while also not falling completely apart. But she saw the logic beneath her mother's command. If Kieran could perceive something in this human, that adult Velith could not, then perhaps the failing was not in the child. Perhaps the failing was in the adults, in their training, in their cultural assumptions about what empathy should feel like, what emotional truth should broadcast as. Perhaps the failing was in her. I understand, Your Majesty, Thera said, the formal address tasting like ash on her tongue. Valeris nodded once, then raised her voice to address the assembled court. This ceremony is concluded. All findings and observations will be recorded for council review. Dismissed. The court erupted into motion, nobles streaming toward exits, guards repositioning, attendants scurrying to fulfill duties. But Thera remained kneeling on the crystalline floor, aware of nothing but her son's small form pressed against the human's leg and the impossible task her mother had just laid at her feet. Marcus Reed cleared his throat softly. Your Highness, I should probably not move until someone tells me it's safe to move. But I'm really sorry about this. I didn't mean to. I know. The words came out sharper than she intended. She softened her tone with effort. I know you did not intend this, Lieutenant, but intention and outcome rarely align perfectly, do they? She reached toward Kieran, careful to keep her empathic broadcast as muted as she could manage, trying to project only the gentlest invitation. Sweetness will you come with Mama now. The quiet human will come too, I promise. Kieran's eyes widened. He's coming. Yes, he will stay with us, in our quarters, for 3 solar cycles. Her son's empathic signature brightened with something that felt like hope, and Thera had to swallow against the tightness in her throat. When had she last felt that emotion from him? When had she last been the source of anything other than anxiety and obligation? Kieran slowly released his grip on Marcus's leg, stepped back, looked up at the human with an expression of tentative trust. Then he moved to Thera's side, his small hand finding hers. The contact felt different now, less like a prisoner and their captor well, more like what it should have been all along. Thera stood, keeping Kieran's hand firmly in hers, and addressed Marcus directly. Lieutenant Reed, you will accompany us to the royal quarters. Your ambassador will be informed of the arrangement. I trust this will not cause undue difficulty. Marcus glanced toward where Ambassador Graves stood, the older man's face cycling through expressions of shock, calculation, and what might have been resignation. Graves gave a minute nod. I'm at your disposal, Your Highness, Marcus said. Then with what Thera was beginning to recognize as characteristic understatement. Though I should mention my job description definitely did not include this scenario. Despite everything, despite the public humiliation, despite the impossible task ahead, despite the fact that her entire understanding of her own capabilities as a mother had just been demolished, Thera felt something that might have been the beginning of a laugh catch in her chest. I suspect, she said, we are all operating well outside our job descriptions at this point. She led them from the grand hall, aware of every eye tracking their movement, every ear swiveling to catch the whispers that would be racing through the palace within minutes. The alien princess whose child preferred aliens. The mother who couldn't soothe her own son. The widow who had failed at the one task that mattered most. Let them whisper. Thera had 72 hours to understand what her 5-year-old child knew instinctively and what she, with all her training and experience, had somehow completely missed. 72 hours to learn a new language of emotion from a being who shouldn't even register on her perceptual frequencies. 72 hours to either prove she was capable of growth or confirm every doubt that had been whispered behind cupped hands since the day Kael died and left her to raise their son alone. The corridors leading to the royal quarters had never felt longer. Kieran walked between them now, one hand in Thera's, the other reaching up to grasp Marcus's sleeve. The human had stiffened at first contact, clearly uncertain if the gesture was allowed, but he'd adapted quickly, adjusting his stride to accommodate the small child between them. They walked in silence, and for once the quiet didn't feel oppressive. It felt, it felt quiet, safe even. The kind of calm Thera had been trying to achieve through empathic projection, only to discover it was something that couldn't be broadcast at all. It was something you simply had to allow space for. The doors to her quarters recognized her empathic signature, imparted, revealing the familiar space that had been both refuge and prison since she'd moved here after Kael's death. The attendants stationed inside looked up in surprise, their ears swiveling forward as they registered the presence of the human. Leave us, Thera said quietly. All of you return in 6 hours. But Your Highness, protocol requires protocol. Thera interrupted, her voice carrying an edge that surprised even herself. Has been the problem, not the solution. Leave us. That is not a request. The attendants exchanged glances, then bowed and retreated, their empathic broadcasts carrying confusion and concern in equal measure. The doors sealed behind them with a soft chime. Alone. For the first time in months, Thera was alone with her son, unobserved, without the constant weight of watching eyes and judging perceptions. And she had absolutely no idea what to do next. Kieran released both their hands and moved to his favorite spot near the window, where the moons were just beginning to rise over the crystal canyons. He pressed his small hands to the transparent wall, looking out at the iridescent mist that perpetually shrouded their world. Marcus stood just inside the doorway, clearly unsure of his place in this space, his posture screaming discomfort despite his attempt at professional composure. And Thera stood between them, mother and stranger, failure and mystery, with 72 hours to understand what had gone so catastrophically wrong and possibly to begin making it right. She looked at Marcus Reed, this void that was not a void, this quiet human who had somehow become the key to unlocking her own son's trust. Lieutenant, she said softly, my son chose you over me. I need to understand why. Will you help me learn what I have been missing? Marcus met her gaze, those simple brown eyes holding depths she couldn't perceive, but somehow sensed were there. He was silent for a moment, and she could see the conflict playing across his face, duty versus compassion, protocol versus instinct. Finally, he spoke. Your Highness, I'm not qualified to teach you anything about empathy or parenting or whatever it is you think I know. I'm just trying to help where I can. Or the wrong place at the wrong time, Thera countered, depending on perspective. Fair point. A ghost of a smile crossed his face there and gone. But I saw something back there in the hall when you were kneeling next to Kieran. What did you see? A mother who's trying so hard to get it right that she can't see she's already doing half of it perfectly. He paused. The love is there, Your Highness. Whatever else is broken, that's not it. Kieran knows you love him. He needs you to love him quieter, I think, if that makes any sense. Quieter, that word again. The concept that should have been simple but felt impossibly complex when filtered through a lifetime of Valith empathic training. I don't know how to be quiet. Thera admitted, the words coming out raw and honest in a way she rarely allowed herself. I don't know how to feel what I feel without broadcasting it. That is not how we are built. That is not how we communicate. Maybe not, Marcus agreed, but maybe that's exactly why Kieran came to me. Because I communicate differently. Not better, not worse, just different. And maybe different is what he needed in that moment. From the window, Kieran's small voice carried across the room. Mama, can the quiet human stay for bedtime? Will you tell stories together? Thera's throat tightened. Bedtime stories. She used to tell them every night before KL died, before grief and duty had consumed everything, before she'd started trying so hard to be perfect that she'd forgotten how to simply be present. Yes, sweetness, she said. He can stay. She looked at Marcus, saw his slight nod of acceptance, and felt something shift in her chest. Not hope exactly, not yet, but maybe the possibility of hope. The recognition that 72 hours might not be enough time to fix everything that was broken, but it might be enough to begin understanding where the cracks had formed. Thank you, she said quietly, for being here, for being patient with my son, for being patient with me. Marcus's expression softened. Your Highness, I had a little sister. Her name's Celeste. When we were kids, she used to hide behind me at family gatherings when things got too loud. I learned pretty early that sometimes the most helpful thing you can do is just be a shield. Be quiet. Let the person you're protecting catch their breath. She was fortunate to have you. She'd probably argue that point. A wry smile bomb. But yeah, we looked out for each other. Still do, actually. She's an engineer now, builds star drives, calls me when she needs someone to complain to about bureaucracy. The casual affection in his voice when he spoke of his sister sent an ache through Thera's chest. That ease, that uncomplicated love. When had her relationship with Kieran lost that simplicity? Come, she said, moving toward the seating area where comfortable cushions were arranged in conversation circles. Sit. We have much to discuss, and I suspect we will both benefit from not standing on protocol for the duration of this arrangement. Marcus followed his movements, careful still, clearly uncomfortable with the informality. He sat across from her, maintaining respectful distance, his posture somewhere between military attention and relaxed civilian. Thera settled into her own seat, felt the familiar cushions adjust to her form, and for the first time all day, allowed herself to simply breathe, to exist without broadcasting, to feel without performing. 72 hours, 3 solar cycles. It wasn't much time, but looking at her son by the window, at the human across from her, at the impossible situation they'd all found themselves in, Thera thought perhaps it was enough. Enough to begin learning a new language. enough to begin hearing what she'd been too loud to notice, enough to begin becoming the mother Kieran needed rather than the mother she thought she should be. The private quarters felt different with Marcus Reed in them. Not uncomfortable exactly, but charged with a kind of awareness that Thera hadn't anticipated. She was acutely conscious of his presence near the window, where Kieran had dragged him to look at the rising moons, conscious of the void space he occupied in her empathic perception, conscious of the fact that her entire understanding of motherhood was about to be dismantled and rebuilt by a species her people had dismissed as emotionally primitive. 72 hours. That's what her mother had given her. 3 solar cycles to understand what had gone so catastrophically wrong between her and Kieran, and possibly to begin making it right. She watched Marcus crouch down to Kieran's eye level, watched her son point excitedly at the celestial display, and felt something twist in her chest. When had she last crouched down to meet Kieran's gaze? When had she last allowed herself to simply exist in his presence without broadcasting maternal expectation and royal protocol? "Lieutenant Reed," she said, her voice carrying more formality than she intended. "A defense mechanism, probably. Kieran will need to rest soon. Perhaps we should discuss the arrangement." Marcus straightened and she caught the flash of understanding in his eyes. He knew she was uncomfortable, knew she was reverting to protocol because vulnerability felt dangerous. And somehow that recognition made it worse because it meant he could read her even without empathic perception. Humans weren't supposed to be that perceptive. "Of course, Your Highness," he turned to Kieran. "Hey, buddy, I'm going to talk with your mom for a bit. Think you can show me those holographic puzzles you mentioned, the ones that make impossible shapes?" Kieran's ears perked forward with enthusiasm. "I'll build you the hardest one. It has 7 dimensions, and it makes grown-ups' eyes hurt." "Sounds perfect. I'll suffer through it in a few minutes." The child scampered off to his play area, and Thera gestured Marcus toward the seating arrangement near the observation window. They sat across from each other, proper distance, appropriate positioning, everything by protocol, except for the absurd fact that she was alone in her private quarters with an alien male, and her empathic training had absolutely no framework for this situation. "So," Marcus said, his hands resting loosely on his knees in a posture that looked casual, but that Thera was beginning to recognize as carefully controlled. 3 solar cycles, 72 Earth hours. You need to figure out why Kieran chose me, and I need to, what exactly be studied, analyzed, until you understand human empathic patterns?" "I don't know," Thera admitted, and the honesty felt like surrender. "I have no framework for this, Lieutenant. Our empathic training assumes universal broadcast patterns. We learn to perceive, interpret, and respond to emotional frequencies that all Valith share. But you don't broadcast on those frequencies. You're not null. Kieran proved that definitively, but you're silent to me, invisible. And I don't know how to learn to perceive what I can't detect." Marcus was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant in a way that suggested internal calculation. "Can I ask you something personal? You're living in my quarters, helping me understand my own child. I think we've exceeded the boundaries of impersonal." A ghost of a smile. "Fair point. When Kieran said your love was too loud, what did you feel?" The question landed like a physical blow. Thera's ears wilted against her head, and she had to fight the urge to retreat into formal platitudes. But this human had just watched her son reject her publicly, had heard Kieran articulate exactly how she'd been failing, and there was no point in protecting dignity that was already in ruins. "Like I'd been stabbed," she said quietly. "Like every fear I've had since Kyle died was being confirmed. That I'm inadequate, that I'm failing, that my love is somehow wrong or broken or harmful. But you kept broadcasting that love anyway, pushing it toward him, trying to make him feel it. Of course, he's my son. He needs to know I love him." "Does he not know?" Thera's breath caught. Of course he knows. I broadcast maternal affection constantly. I project protection, support, guidance. But does he know you love him? Not that you're performing the appropriate empathic signals of a Valith mother. Does Kieran know in his bones that you love him exactly as he is, not as you need him to become?" The words hit like hammer blows, each one cracking something in the careful construction Thera had built around her grief and inadequacy. She wanted to argue, wanted to defend herself, wanted to explain that everything she'd done had been for Kieran's benefit. But Marcus's simple brown eyes held no judgment, just the same question, waiting for an honest answer. I don't know, she whispered. I thought I was showing him. Every day, every broadcast, every attempt to soothe his distress and guide his development. I thought that was love. It is love, but maybe it's love delivered at the wrong volume for his particular nervous system. Thera's hands clenched in her lap. I don't understand what that means. How can love have wrong volume? How can caring too much be the problem? Marcus leaned forward slightly, his posture shifting into something that looked less like formal discussion and more like genuine conversation. When my sister Celeste was 12, she got taken. Hostage situation terrorist attack on a transit station in Colorado. I was 18, supposed to be watching her, and I failed. She was gone for 6 hours before authorities extracted her. His voice remained steady, but Thera could see the tension in his shoulders, could see the old pain flickering across his features, even if she couldn't perceive it empathically. After they got her back, I was a mess, completely consumed with relief and guilt and residual terror. And I wanted to hold on to her, wanted to keep her close, wanted to broadcast every ounce of protective love I felt so she'd know she was safe. But you know what happened when I tried that? Thera shook her head. She flinched, just like Kieran flinches from you. Because my fear for her, my overwhelming need to protect her, my desperate love, it was too much. It wasn't what she needed. She needed space to process her own trauma, not to absorb mine. What did you do? I learned to sit with my own fear instead of putting it on her. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is feel everything you feel and choose not to broadcast it. Let the other person have room to breathe. Thera absorbed this, her mind racing through implications. But Velith empathy doesn't work that way. We're meant to share emotional states to synchronize, to broadcast, and receive as fundamental communication. Suppressing emotion is considered dishonest, harmful to social bonds. For Velith, maybe, but Kieran ran to me precisely because I wasn't broadcasting. Because in a room full of empathic noise, I was quiet. That doesn't mean I wasn't feeling anything. It means I wasn't making my feelings his problem. The concept was so foreign to everything Thera had been taught that her mind struggled to process it. Emotion without broadcast, feeling without sharing, love that didn't demand to be perceived. I need to show you something, she said abruptly, rising from her seat. A memory, if you'll permit empathic contact. Marcus tensed slightly. What does that involve? I placed my fingers here. She gestured to her temples. And I open a deeper channel than ambient broadcast. You'll experience my memories as if they were your own. It's intimate in a way that your culture might find uncomfortable. Will it hurt you? The question surprised her. Not will it hurt me, but will it hurt you? Concern directed outward even in the face of personal discomfort. No, she said. It's natural for my physiology, but I need your permission. Marcus studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, show me. Thera moved to kneel beside his chair, positioned herself carefully for the Velith empathic contact that allowed deeper connection than ambient broadcast. She placed her fingers against his temples, felt the warmth of human skin, so similar to Velith, and yet fundamentally different in the subtle electrical patterns beneath. She closed her eyes, opened her empathic channels completely, and pulled Marcus into the memory that had defined the last 5 years of her life. The military base on the border world. The communication coming through fragmentary and desperate. Raiders attacking the colony, Commander K.L. Valen leading the defense, need immediate reinforcement. Thera, 8 months pregnant, forbidden from combat duty, pacing the command center, while her husband fought and died 3 star systems away. The final transmission. K.L.'s voice calm, despite the chaos audible in the background. Tell Thera I love her. Tell our son I would have been proud to meet him. Tell them both. Static, silence, death, and then the birth 3 weeks later. Alone because her mother was managing diplomatic crisis and couldn't leave the capital. Alone because KL was gone and would never hold their child. Alone with a screaming infant who needed her completely, and a grief so profound it felt like physical dismemberment. The first year was a blur of desperate attempts to be enough for Kieran while being crushed by loss. Broadcasting love and stability while internally screaming, projecting maternal competence while having no idea what she was doing. Trying to be both parents, trying to honor KL's memory, trying to raise a future ruler, while barely holding herself together. And the whispers, always the whispers. Poor child without his father's strength. The princess is too soft. She cannot control him. He will grow weak under her influence alone. So Thera had tried harder, broadcast stronger, projected more determination, more confidence, more maternal authority, shaped herself into what she thought a single mother raising the heir should be: unshakable, always broadcasting appropriate emotions, never showing the cracks underneath. And with every broadcast, with every empathic projection of what she thought Kieran needed, she'd felt him withdraw further, felt his small, empathic signature recoiling from her intensity. But she'd interpreted it wrong, thought he needed more support, more guidance, more love broadcast at higher volume. Until today, until her son ran from her to an alien who didn't broadcast at all. Thera pulled back from the empathic contact, released Marcus's temples, and found tears streaming down her face. She'd meant to show him clinical memory, explain context. Instead, she'd given him everything: the grief, the inadequacy, the desperate fear that she was failing, the only thing she had left of Kyle. Marcus was breathing hard, his eyes slightly unfocused in the way humans looked when processing intense emotional input. "Oh," he said softly. "Oh, Thera, you've been carrying all of that alone." The use of her name, not title, just name, made something break in her chest. "I've been trying so hard to do it right," she whispered. "Trying to be what Kieran needs, what the throne needs, what Kyle would have wanted, and I've been failing at all of it." "No," Marcus's voice was firm. "You've been succeeding at the wrong thing. You've been succeeding at looking like you're handling it, at broadcasting competence and control, but you've been failing at letting yourself grieve, at being a person who's scared and needs support, not just a mother who's supposed to provide it. I can't afford to be that person. Kieran needs me strong. Kieran needs you honest. There's a difference." Thera looked at him through tears, this alien who'd somehow seen through every defense she'd constructed and felt utterly exposed. Vulnerable in a way she hadn't allowed since Kale's death. "I don't know how to be honest," she admitted. "I've spent 5 years performing strength. I've forgotten what truth feels like." "Then maybe we start there." Marcus shifted, moved from the chair to sit on the floor beside where she knelt, bringing himself to her level. "Not with learning my frequency, with you learning to turn down your broadcast enough to hear yourself underneath it. That's not how Valeth empathy works. Maybe it should be." He gestured toward where Kieran was playing the child's empathic signature, quiet and content now that the overwhelming adult emotions had subsided. "He can't handle your full broadcast. Not because there's something wrong with him, because you're broadcasting grief and fear and desperation underneath the maternal love, and he's perceiving all of it, every layer, and it's too much for a 5-year-old nervous system." The logic was undeniable. Thera had assumed Kieran perceived only what she consciously projected: the love, the support, the guidance. She'd never considered that his empathic sensitivity might perceive everything, including the emotions she thought she was successfully suppressing, including the terror that she was inadequate, the grief that carved through her every time she looked at him and saw Kale's eyes, the desperate fear that she would fail him the way she'd failed to protect his father. "How do I stop broadcasting what I feel?" "You don't. You just stop trying to make him responsible for managing it." Marcus paused. "Can I try something, an experiment?" "What kind of experiment?" "I'm going to stay here being quiet the way I am, and you're going to try to match my empathic volume. Not silence, you can't do that and shouldn't have to, but just lower intensity. See if you can exist in this room without filling it completely." It sounded impossible, but Thera had run out of other options. "All right, tell me how." "Close your eyes. Focus on your breathing. Now feel what you're feeling, the grief, the fear, the love, all of it. Don't suppress it. Don't try to change it. Just feel it without broadcasting it outward." Thera closed her eyes, tried to follow his instructions. Immediately, her empathic training rebelled. Feeling without broadcasting was antithetical to everything she'd been taught. Velith empathy was communication, sharing, connection, but she forced herself to try. To feel the grief for Kyle without projecting it across the room. To acknowledge her fear of inadequacy without making it Kieran's burden. To recognize the love she felt for her son without demanding he perceive and respond to it. It was agonizing. Every instinct screamed at her to broadcast a share to make her emotional state known. Containing it felt like holding back a tidal wave with her bare hands. "That's it," Marcus said softly. "I can't perceive it the way Kieran can, but I can see it in your body language. You're feeling everything but choosing not to push it outward. That's exactly right." "It hurts," Thera gasped. "It physically hurts to contain this." "I know, it gets easier with practice. For humans, we've been doing it our whole lives. For you, it's new. But you're doing it, and look." Thera opened her eyes. Kieran had abandoned his puzzles and was walking toward them, his small face curious rather than apprehensive. His empathic signature reached out tentatively, and instead of recoiling from overwhelming intensity, he seemed to relax into the reduced broadcast. "Mama, you're quieter," he said, wonder in his voice. "I can hear you better now. Better, but I'm broadcasting less loud, so I can actually listen. Before it was like..." Kieran scrunched his face, searching for words. "Like trying to hear music when someone's shouting. Now I can hear the music." Thera's breath caught. All this time she'd thought more was better. That broadcasting stronger maternal love would make Kieran feel more secure. But to his sensitive child empathy, it had been noise. Static, overwhelming intensity that drowned out the actual message underneath. She'd been shouting her love so loud he couldn't hear it at all. "Come here, sweetness," she said softly, and Kieran came without hesitation, climbing into her lap in a way he hadn't done in months. She held him, carefully maintaining the reduced broadcast intensity, and felt him relax against her in a way that made her chest ache. "I'm sorry," she whispered against his head fur. "I'm so sorry I've been too loud. I didn't know. I was trying to help, and I was hurting you instead." "It's okay, Mama. You're learning. Marcus is teaching you." She looked at the human over Kieran's head, this impossible being who'd somehow understood in hours what she'd failed to grasp in years. "Thank you for showing me, for being patient with both of us." Marcus shrugged, but there was warmth in his eyes. "I'm just trying to help where I can. You're doing the hard work." They sat in comfortable quiet for long minutes, Thera holding Kieran, Marcus, a quiet presence nearby. And for the first time since Kael's death, Thera felt like maybe she could breathe. Maybe she could exist in her son's presence without performing. Maybe she could love him at a volume he could actually receive. Eventually, Kieran's eyes began to droop, and Thera carried him to his sleeping chamber, tucked him into the crystal-grown bed that adjusted to his small form. She ran her fingers gently through his head, for broadcast a whisper-soft lullaby of maternal love, and watched him drift into peaceful sleep. When she returned to the main quarters, Marcus had moved to the window, looking out at the celestial display with an expression she couldn't read. She joined him, maintaining the careful distance that protocol demanded, and they stood in silence for a moment. 71 hours left," Marcus said finally. "What happens after that, when your mother wants a report?" "I tell her the truth, that humans aren't empathically null, that you broadcast on frequencies we've trained ourselves to ignore, that our cultural assumption of universal empathic patterns is flawed. And she'll believe you. She'll have to. The evidence is sleeping peacefully for the first time in months." Thera paused. "But there's another issue. Elder Mordain and his faction, they won't accept this easily. The idea that humans have empathic depth challenges their entire worldview, challenges our cultural superiority." Marcus turned to look at her fully. "You think they'll interfere?" "I think they'll demand proof. Rigorous testing, probably invasive, possibly designed to fail. They'll want to prove that Kieran's response to you is anomaly or deception, not evidence of human emotional capacity. Let them test." His voice was quiet but certain. "I'll submit to whatever they want. If it helps bridge our species, if it protects Kieran from accusations of being contaminated, I'll endure it." Thera studied his face, this human who kept offering to sacrifice his comfort for beings he barely knew. Why are you willing to go through that?" "Because Celeste called me yesterday, before all this happened, asked how the diplomatic posting was going." He smiled, sad and fond. I told her it was boring, standing in corners looking official, trying not to fall asleep during ceremonial blessings. She laughed, said it sounded perfect for me, said she was proud of me for doing something meaningful, even if it was tedious. And now I'm going to have to tell her I accidentally became the focal point of interspecies empathic understanding by being a hiding spot for a scared kid. She's going to laugh her ass off, but she'll also understand why I can't walk away. Because this matters. Because Kieran matters. Because you matter. The last words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Thera wasn't ready to examine. Because you matter. Not the diplomatic mission. Not interspecies relations. You. I should let you rest, she said, retreating from the intensity of the moment. Your quarters are through that passage. My attendants prepared them earlier. If you need anything— Thera, Marcus's voice stopped her. I saw your grief. When we did the empathic contact, I felt how much you love Kyle, how much you still love him. And I need you to know I'm not trying to replace him. I'm not trying to be Kieran's father. I'm just trying to help where I can. I know, her throat tight, and that's exactly why it's working. Because you're not performing a role. You're just being who you are. And who you are is apparently exactly what we needed. She retreated to her own chambers before the conversation could go deeper, before she had to confront the growing awareness that Marcus Reed was becoming more than just a diplomatic complication. That somewhere in the chaos of the last solar cycle, this quiet human had become someone she relied on, someone she trusted, someone whose presence made breathing easier. But there would be time to examine that later. After she'd reported to her mother, after they'd survived whatever testing Mordane's faction demanded, after she'd learned to be the mother Kieran needed. For now, she allowed herself to simply exist in the quiet Marcus had taught her to create, feeling everything, broadcasting almost nothing, learning that love didn't have to be loud to be real. The next morning arrived with the soft chime of the palace's automated systems, adjusting light levels to simulate dawn. Thera woke from the first full night's sleep she'd had in months, momentarily disoriented by the absence of the usual anxiety that greeted her each day. Then she remembered. Marcus, Kieran's peaceful sleep. The impossible task ahead. She found them both in the main quarters, Kieran building his seven-dimensional puzzle, while Marcus watched with an expression of bemused concentration, occasionally asking questions that made the child laugh, with delight at the human's confusion. It's not supposed to make sense in 3 dimensions, Kieran was explaining patiently. You have to think sideways and backwards at the same time. Right, sideways and backwards, obviously. Marcus caught Thera's entrance, offered a slight smile. Your Highness, your son is trying to break my brain before breakfast. It's good for humans to have broken brains, Kieran announced with the absolute certainty of childhood. Makes room for new thoughts. Thera felt something warm in her chest, something that might have been joy if she'd remembered how to recognize it. Sweetness, where did you hear that? I made it up. Is it true? It might be. She moved to join them, settling onto the floor with less regard for protocol than she'd have thought possible yesterday. What new thoughts are we making room for? Marcus is learning that impossible shapes are possible if you stop thinking they're impossible. That's very philosophical for someone who hasn't had breakfast yet. The casual domesticity of the moment struck Thera with unexpected force. When had she last sat on the floor with Kieran? When had she last allowed herself to simply exist in his presence without agenda, without broadcast, without the constant weight of royal expectation? A soft chime interrupted the moment. The communication panel near the door was requesting attention. Thera's ears flattened slightly. She'd asked not to be disturbed for the duration of the 72 hours unless absolutely necessary. She rose, moved to the panel, and found her mother's sigil displayed. Not a suggestion, a summons. I need to take this, she said to Marcus. We'll keep building impossible things. Take your time. Thera activated the communication link in her private study, ensuring the door was sealed. Queen Valerice's face materialized in the holographic display, her expression unreadable. Daughter, I trust the first night of your assignment was productive. It was enlightening, Mother. I'm beginning to understand the nature of the problem. Good. Because Elder Mordane has demanded an emergency council session. He claims that allowing unsupervised human contact with the air is dangerous, potentially corrupting. He's calling for formal empathic analysis of the human conducted by the Empathic Research Institute. Thera's stomach dropped. When, this afternoon, I've delayed as long as protocol allows, but he has enough council support to force the issue. You'll need to present the human for testing. Mother Mordain will design the tests to fail. He's not interested in truth. He's interested in confirming his biases. I'm aware, which is why I'm giving you a choice. Valeris's eyes held something that might have been sympathy. You can refuse to submit Lieutenant Reed for testing, citing the 3-day exemption I granted. But that will only delay the inevitable and give Mordain time to build more support. Or you can volunteer the human for testing today, but insist on conducting the analysis yourself. As a trained empath, and as the one with most exposure to the subject, you have legitimate claim to lead the research. It will be invasive, potentially uncomfortable for both of you, but it keeps control in your hands, rather than Mordain's. Thera's mind raced through implications. Conducting the testing herself meant exposing Marcus to empathic analysis that went far deeper than the memory sharing they'd done last night. It meant opening his emotional patterns to scrutiny, cataloging his responses, potentially causing him significant discomfort. But it also meant protecting him from whatever cruelty Mordain's researchers might inflict in their zeal to prove humans dangerous. I'll do it, she said. I'll conduct the analysis. But I need access to the formal research facilities, full recording equipment, and council observers who are genuinely neutral, not Mordain's faction. Agreed, I'll have everything prepared. The session is scheduled for mid-afternoon. That gives you 4 hours. Valeris paused. Thera, I know this is difficult, but if you can demonstrate definitively that humans possess empathic capacity on frequencies we've been trained to ignore, it could change everything. Not just for this treaty, but for how we understand ourselves. And if I fail, then Mordain gets what he wants, proof that humans are empathically null and justification to end all contact. The treaty dies. Lieutenant Reed returns to Earth and Kieran. Valeris's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Kieran loses the first being outside our species who's managed to bring him peace. The weight of it settled over Thera's shoulders. Not just diplomatic stakes, not just political consequences. Her son's well-being hung in the balance. I understand, Mother. I won't fail. See that you don't. The communication link severed, leaving Thera alone in the study with the crushing responsibility of what she'd just agreed to. She took a moment to steady herself, to reduce her empathic broadcast to the quiet level Marcus had taught her, then returned to the main quarters. Marcus took one look at her face and stood. What happened? We've been summoned. Mordain is demanding formal empathic analysis. This afternoon. She forced herself to meet his gaze. I can conduct the testing myself, which keeps you out of his researchers' hands. But it will be invasive. Deep empathic scanning response testing, possibly hours of exposure to stimuli, designed to elicit strong emotional reactions. To prove I'm dangerous. To prove you're not. But the process itself might be difficult. Marcus was quiet for a moment. What kind of difficult? I'll be mapping your complete empathic profile. Every emotional response, every fear, every memory that shapes your reactions. Nothing will be private. And because Valith empathic analysis requires sustained contact, you'll be experiencing my perceptions of you simultaneously. It creates a feedback loop that humans might find disorienting. Will it hurt? Psychologically, possibly. Physically, no. Will it hurt you? There it was again, that fundamental orientation toward others' welfare before his own. It's uncomfortable for the analyst, but I'm trained for it. Marcus nodded slowly. Okay, do it. Whatever you need to prove the truth. Marcus, you don't have to. Yes, I do. His voice was gentle but firm. Kieran needs this. You need this. And honestly, if it means Mordain can't use me as a weapon against your family, I'll sit through whatever testing you want to throw at me. Thera felt her throat tighten. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You might discover I'm secretly a terrible person. Somehow I doubt that. Kieran had been watching their conversation with wide eyes. Now he moved to Marcus's side, wrapped his arms around the human's leg in an echo of yesterday's public moment. Will the testing hurt, Marcus? No sweetness. It will just be uncomfortable. Can I come? I want to make sure he's okay. You can't be in the testing chamber, but you can watch through the observation window. Thera knelt to his level. And Kieran, this is very important. The people watching will ask you questions about Marcus, about how he makes you feel. You need to tell them the truth exactly as you perceive it. I always tell the truth. Marcus is quiet and safe and good. Then that's what you tell them. The 4 hours until the testing session passed in a blur of preparation. Thera reviewed empathic analysis protocols, updated herself on the latest methodologies, and tried to ignore the growing anxiety about exposing Marcus to this level of scrutiny. Marcus spent the time with Kieran teaching him a human card game that involved impossible probability calculations and good-natured cheating. Watching them together, the ease of it, the uncomplicated affection, Thera felt a renewed determination to protect this connection her son had found. When the time came, they traveled to the Empathic Research Institute in the palace's scientific wing. The facility was state-of-the-art, designed for deep analysis of empathic patterns in everything from child development to criminal psychology. Today, it would be used to dissect a human's emotional truth. Elder Mordain was waiting in the observation gallery, along with 6 council members representing various factions. His white ears twitched with barely suppressed satisfaction as they entered. Princess Thera, how kind of you to accommodate the council's concerns. Elder Mordain, how kind of you to take such interest in scientific methodology. She kept her voice neutral professional. Shall we begin? The testing chamber was a circular room with walls that could project any environment, any stimulus. In the center, a crystalline chair designed to facilitate deep empathic contact. Monitoring equipment lined the walls, ready to record every frequency of emotional broadcast. Thera led Marcus into the chamber, while Kieran was escorted to the observation gallery by a research assistant. She could feel the weight of eyes on them, Mordain's faction searching for evidence of deception, neutral observers genuinely curious, and her son's worried gaze seeking reassurance. Sit here, she instructed Marcus, gesturing to the crystalline chair. The chair will adjust to your physiology. Try to relax. Relax while being empathically dissected. Sure, no problem. But he sat and the chair rippled, adapting to his human frame. Thera positioned herself in the analyst's stance, standing close enough for sustained empathic contact, but not so close as to be threatening. She placed her fingers against his temples, the same contact points they'd used for memory sharing. But this time, the channel she opened was far deeper. This will feel different from last night, she warned. I'm not just sharing a memory, I'm mapping your entire empathic signature. You might experience disorientation, sensory overlap, emotional amplification. If it becomes unbearable, tell me and I'll pull back. I trust you. Simple. Absolute. Those 3 words nearly broke her focus. She took a breath, steadied herself, and began. The first layer was surface emotion, what Marcus was feeling in this exact moment. Nervousness, determination, concern for Kieran. A deep thread of trust in Thera herself that she hadn't expected. All of it broadcast on frequencies so subtle that adult Velith normally filtered them as background noise. Subject demonstrates clear emotional engagement, Thera narrated for the recording. Frequencies are non-standard for Velith perception, but consistent and coherent. Proceeding to deeper analysis, she pushed further into the structures beneath immediate emotion, found the patterns that shaped Marcus's responses, his protective instinct rooted in the Celeste trauma, his discipline built through years of military service and personal commitment to never freeze in crisis again, his quiet determination to do right even when the cost was high, and underneath it all, a bedrock of fundamental decency that Mordain's faction would hate to acknowledge. Marcus Reed wasn't performing goodness. He simply was good in the uncomplicated way that made cynics uncomfortable. Subject shows consistent empathic patterns. Thera continued. No evidence of deception or manipulative intent. Emotional baseline is oriented toward others' welfare. Protective instincts are genuine, not strategic. From the observation gallery, Mordain's voice came through the communication system. Princess, surely you must detect the subtle frequencies of deception. Humans are masters of emotional manipulation. I detect no such frequencies, Elder. In fact, Thera went deeper, risking a level of analysis that was typically reserved for criminal psychology. I'm finding that the subject's emotional discipline serves protective functions, not deceptive ones. He contains his own distress to avoid burdening others, particularly children, and those he perceives as vulnerable. She showed Marcus her perception of him, let him see himself through empathic analysis, the extraordinary effort it took to maintain his calm, the constant choice to prioritize others' comfort over his own emotional release. Let him feel how much strength that required, how much courage. Marcus's breath caught. Is that really how you see me? That's how you are, she murmured, quiet enough that the recording might not catch it. She spent 2 hours in sustained analysis, pushing into every corner of Marcus's empathic profile, tested his responses to various stimuli images of suffering scenarios requiring moral choice, prompts designed to elicit fear or anger or grief. Every test came back the same. Genuine emotional response immediately followed by disciplined management of that response. Fear acknowledged but not allowed to paralyze. Anger recognized but not permitted to harm. Grief felt but contained so it wouldn't overflow onto others. It was, Thera realized, the most sophisticated emotional regulation she'd ever analyzed. Not suppression, Marcus felt everything, but conscious choice about what to broadcast, what to express, what to let on affect his actions. Adult Velith broadcast everything and expected others to manage their own responses to that broadcast. Marcus felt everything and chose to manage his own emotions so others wouldn't have to. It was the opposite of emotional nullity. It was emotional mastery. Finally exhausted from sustained deep analysis, Thera pulled back, removed her fingers from Marcus's temples. He slumped slightly in the chair, his face pale, his eyes unfocused. Are you all right? She asked quietly. That was intense, seeing myself through your perception, feeling how hard you're working to understand me. He managed a weak smile. I think I need to lie down for about 6 hours. Soon. She turned to address the observation gallery, her voice carrying the authority of professional analysis. Testing complete. I'm prepared to present findings. Mordain stood his ears at aggressive forward angles. And what did you find, Princess? Evidence of human empathic capacity or confirmation of their null state? Thera met his gaze steadily. I found that humans broadcast on frequencies approximately 15% lower than standard Velith range. Our empathic training teaches us to filter anything below standard range as environmental noise. That's why we perceive them as null. She pulled up her analysis data, displayed it holographically for all to see. But children, particularly young children, whose empathic sensitivity hasn't been narrowed by cultural training, can perceive these lower frequencies naturally. Prince Kieran didn't choose Lieutenant Reed because he was fooled. He chose him because he could perceive the human's genuine emotional state, and that state was safer than the overwhelming broadcasts of adults around him. Convenient interpretation, Mordain scoffed. Or perhaps the human has trained himself to mimic safety while hiding aggression underneath. I tested for exactly that. Spent the last 2 hours searching for hidden aggression, deception, manipulative intent. Found none. Thera's voice hardened. Unless you're suggesting that I, a trained empathic analyst and member of the royal family, am incompetent to recognize deception when I'm literally inside someone's emotional structure. That landed. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. Challenging her competence meant challenging royal authority, and even Mordain's faction wasn't ready to go that far. But the elder wasn't finished. Then let the child testify. Let Prince Kieran explain in his own words why he chose this human over his own mother. Thera's ears flattened. That was a low blow, using her public failure as evidence. But before she could respond, Kieran's voice came through the communication system. I chose Marcus because Mama was too loud and I couldn't breathe. The observation gallery went silent. Kieran continued, his child's voice carrying absolute honesty. Mama loves me so much it fills up all the air. I know she loves me, but it's like trying to drink from a waterfall. It's too much at once. Marcus loves quieter. He lets me have space to breathe. That doesn't mean Mama's bad. It means I need it different. And now Mama's learning to love quieter too, and it's better. Thera felt tears threaten. Out of the mouths of children came the brutal, perfect truth. But the human could be teaching the child to reject Velith empathy, Mordain pressed, corrupting his natural responses. I'm not corrupted. Kieran's indignation came through clearly. I'm just tired of everyone being so loud all the time. Marcus showed me that quiet is okay. That feeling things without shouting them is okay. That's not corruption. That's just different. One of the neutral council members, Counselor Thera, didn't recognize, spoke up. Elder Mordain, the child's testimony supports Princess Thera's analysis. If humans broadcast on frequencies we've been trained to ignore, and if our children can naturally perceive those frequencies, this suggests the deficit is in our cultural training, not in human capacity. Preposterous. You would overturn millennia of Valith empathic science based on one child's preference and one princess's analysis of a single human subject. No, Thera said quietly. I would overturn bad assumptions based on empirical evidence. My analysis is recorded, replicable, and available for peer review. The data is clear. Humans possess empathic capacity. We've simply been deaf to it. Mordain's ears flattened completely. This is not over. I will not allow human contamination of our culture based on. He never finished the sentence. Alarms began blaring throughout the facility, a specific pattern that Thera recognized with ice-cold dread. Emergency protocol, child protection services, Royal Air security compromised. Every screen in the facility lit up with the same message: Prince Kieran Vallon, location unknown, Royal Quarters security breach. Thera's world tilted. She spun toward the observation gallery, but Kieran wasn't there. The research assistant who'd been supervising him was slumped in a chair unconscious. The door to the gallery stood open. No. The word came out as a whisper. No, no, no. Marcus was on his feet despite his exhaustion. What's happening? Kieran's gone. Someone took him. She was already moving, her mind shifting from analyst to warrior, from scientist to mother. The alarms mean he's not just lost. He's been deliberately removed from palace security. Her communicator chimed, Queen Valeris's voice tight with controlled fury. Thera, we have a situation. I know. Kieran's empathic signature has been traced to the old palace, the abandoned wing in the Crystal Canyons. Guards found unconscious with harmonic stunning. This was planned, coordinated. Thera's mind raced. The old palace, isolated, defensible, far enough from the main complex that a determined party could delay response. How long ago? Estimated 12 minutes. We're mobilizing Royal Guard now, but by the time they arrive, whoever took him will have what they wanted. Thera's voice went cold. Mother, I'm going after him. Now. Absolutely not. You're not trained for... I was trained for combat operations before I was trained for diplomacy. I know the old palace's layout, and I'm not waiting for bureaucratic mobilization while my son is in danger. A pause, then Valeris's voice carefully neutral. The Royal Armory will issue you appropriate equipment. But Thera, if this is what I suspect, if Mordain's faction has orchestrated this, then they'll learn that I'm Kael's widow for a reason. He wasn't the only warrior in our marriage. Thera severed the connection, turned to find Marcus already moving toward the exit. Where are you going? With you, to get Kieran. Lieutenant, you're exhausted from 2 hours of empathic analysis. You're human. You have no training for... I have 12 years of tactical operations experience, including hostage extraction. I'm the only person in this palace who won't broadcast empathically, which makes me invisible to anyone tracking threats by empathic signature. And Kieran might need someone quiet when you find him. Thera wanted to argue, wanted to protect him, wanted to follow every protocol that said civilians didn't belong in combat operations. But he was right. His empathic invisibility was an asset, and if Kieran was terrified, Marcus's presence might be the only thing that could calm him. The armory, now. We have maybe 30 minutes before Mordain realizes his testing session has become a rescue operation. They ran. The old palace rose from the Crystal Canyons like a monument to forgotten gods, its Gothic spires catching the light of 3 moons and throwing fractured rainbows across the iridescent mists. Thera crouched behind an outcropping of grown stone, her hand resting on the harmonic blade she'd requisitioned from the Royal Armory, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years course through her veins. Not fear, not the paralyzing anxiety that had defined her since Kael's death. This was something cleaner, sharper. This was the focused clarity of a warrior preparing for battle, the calm determination she'd thought she'd lost, when she traded her combat leathers for ceremonial robes and become a mother instead of a defender. Turned out she could be both. Marcus moved silently beside her, his human inability to broadcast empathically, making him nearly invisible to any Valith, relying on emotional perception to track movement. He'd removed his formal, diplomatic jacket, now wore only the black tactical underlayer, and moved with an efficiency that spoke of extensive field experience. She'd underestimated him initially, had seen only the humble security officer. But watching him navigate the treacherous canyon paths, watching him assess terrain and calculate approach vectors, she was seeing the trained soldier beneath the diplomatic veneer. Building layout, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind that howled through the crystal formations. Thera pulled up the mental map she'd been constructing during their approach. Central chamber 3 stories high, used for ancient bonding rituals before we moved the capital. 4 access points, main entrance, 2 side passages, 1 emergency vent system that exits through the roof. Guards. Mordain had 4 with him in the council chamber. Assume all 4 here, plus possibly more if he's been planning this longer than we know. Weapons. Harmonic staffs. Lethal range 20 meters, incapacitation range 40. They'll sense our approach empathically before they see us. They'll sense you, Marcus corrected quietly. I'm still a void to them, remember, that's our advantage. Thera's ears twitched. He was right. In all the years of Velith military strategy, they'd never had to account for combatants who couldn't be perceived empathically. Every tactical doctrine assumed you could feel your opponent's position, could sense their emotional state, could track their movement through the battlefield via their broadcast signature. Marcus Reed was a ghost, and she was about to use that to get her son back. How do we prove Mordain's guilt? She asked, voicing the concern that had been gnawing at her since they'd left the palace. He's recording evidence to present to the council. Edited footage of us rescuing Kieran will look like exactly what he wants it to look like. Human aggression, alien infiltration, justification for ending all contact. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the approach to the old palace's main entrance. Kieran, he's empathic. When we find him, he'll broadcast the truth of what happened. Every Valith in range will feel it. Mordain will suppress him, block his broadcast. Can he block me? Thera's ears snapped forward. You want to broadcast, but you're quiet. That's your entire... I'm quiet because I choose to be, Marcus said, and something in his voice made her look at him more closely. But I can choose differently. If I stop containing everything, if I let it all out at once, every fear, every protective instinct, every emotion I usually keep locked down, and Kieran amplifies it through his empathic connection to me. Understanding hit her like a physical blow. Every Valith in range will perceive your emotional truth, your intentions, your complete lack of deception or malice toward Kieran. Yeah, but there's a bias. His jaw tightened. Humans aren't built to broadcast. Doing it deliberately, forcing that kind of emotional exposure, it's going to hurt. A lot. And I don't know what the psychological aftermath will be. Thera reached out, stopped just short of touching his arm. You would endure that for my son. Marcus met her gaze, and in the pale light of the moons, his simple brown eyes held absolute certainty. For your son. Yeah. Something warm and painful expanded in Thera's chest. Not romance, there was no time or space for that complexity yet, but profound recognition. This human, this stranger from a species her people had dismissed as empathically deficient, was willing to cause himself genuine harm to protect a child he'd known for less than 2 solar cycles. And she was beginning to understand that quiet didn't mean absence. It meant discipline. It meant choosing not to burden others with your pain, even when the pain was real and overwhelming. It meant strength, not weakness. Then we move now, she said, rising from their cover position, before I lose my nerve, before I start thinking about all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. Too late for that, Marcus said, but there was a ghost of a smile on his face. I've been thinking about catastrophic failure since we left the palace. Occupational hazard. They moved toward the old palace in tandem, Thera leading, because she knew the terrain, Marcus following close enough to guard her back, but far enough not to interfere with her movement. The warrior training she'd thought she'd abandoned came back like muscle memory. How to place her feet for silence on crystal surfaces. How to read the environment for threats. How to breathe in combat rhythm. to keep her empathic signature as muted as possible. She'd been a fighter once before Kieran, before grief had convinced her that being a mother meant putting away anything that resembled strength or violence. But watching her son's trust in this human soldier had taught her something crucial. Protection wasn't the opposite of gentleness. Sometimes protection required force. Sometimes love required you to be willing to fight. The main entrance to the old palace stood open, an invitation or a trap or both. Thera paused at the threshold, extending her empathic senses into the building's interior. She caught fragments of adult Velith's signatures, at least four, all broadcasting variations of duty and determination. And beneath them, smaller and more chaotic, Kieran's empathic presence. Her son, terrified but alive, his emotional broadcast cycling through fear and confusion and something that felt like betrayal. He didn't understand why he'd been taken, didn't understand why the adults he'd been taught to trust had locked him in crystal and told him his mother was dangerous. Rage flooded Thera's system, hot and clean and clarifying. She'd spent months suppressing her emotions, trying to broadcast only calm and maternal warmth. But rage had its place. Rage properly channeled could fuel the kind of determination that moved mountains, or rescued sons from treasonous elders. "He's here," she whispered to Marcus. "Central chamber. I can feel him." "How many hostiles?" "4 guards, Mordain. Maybe others I can't perceive clearly through the interference." Marcus nodded once. "Then we go quiet. We get visual confirmation before we engage, and we don't give Mordain time to spin the narrative." They entered the old palace together, and Thera felt the weight of centuries pressed down around them. This place had stood for 3,000 years, had witnessed bonding ceremonies and coronations and sacred rituals that predated the current dynasty. The walls held memories, empathic echoes of profound emotions broadcast so powerfully they'd literally soaked into the crystal structure. She could feel them now: joy and grief and determination and sacrifice. All the vast spectrum of Velith emotion preserved like insects in amber, resonating faintly with her own heightened state. The corridor opened into the central chamber, and Thera's breath caught. Kieran stood in a crystal cage, humane in its design, comfortable even, but undeniably a prison. He was still wearing his ceremonial robes from the morning's disaster, now rumpled and tear-stained. His small hands pressed against the transparent barrier, and his ears were pressed completely flat in a position that meant absolute misery. Mordain stood before a recording device, his white ears adorned with ceremonial jewelry that chimed softly as he spoke into the camera. "Evidence will demonstrate that humans planned this abduction to destabilize Velith's sovereignty. We intercepted their operative, but the damage to our cultural integrity cannot be understated. The princess herself has been compromised, her judgment clouded by alien manipulation of her traumatized child. The High Council must act decisively to end all human contact before you finish constructing that beautiful fiction." Thera stepped into the chamber, her voice carrying the harmonics of barely controlled fury. "How long did it take you to script that performance, Mordain?" The elder spun his ears, snapping to attention. The 4 guards positioned around the chamber raised their harmonic staffs, the weapons humming to active status. "Princess, thank the ancestors the human led you into our trap. Guards, seize the alien, the only one who will be seized." Thera said, her empathic broadcast exploding outward with enough force to make the nearest guard stagger. "Is you, for kidnapping the heir to the Velith throne, for treason, for terrorizing a child to serve your political agenda." She moved forward, and something in her posture, the combat-ready stance, the way her hand rested on the harmonic blade at her hip, the absolute certainty in her empathic signature made the guards hesitate. They knew her history, knew she'd been warrior-trained before her marriage, had defended border worlds against raiders, had killed when necessary to protect her people. They'd forgotten, perhaps. Hidden beneath ceremonial robes and royal protocols, the warrior had seemed to vanish. But she'd never left. She'd just been waiting for a reason to resurface. Mordain's ears flattened. "You speak of treason, you who have allowed alien contamination of our most sacred air, who has brought human poison into the very heart of the royal family." "I speak of a mother defending her child," Thera snapped. "And if you interpret that as treason, elder, then your definition of loyalty needs revision." She was moving as she spoke, circling toward Kieran's cage, forcing the guards to adjust their positions to track her. In her peripheral vision, she could see Marcus hanging back near the entrance, still unperceived by the guards whose empathic senses couldn't detect his void-like signature, waiting for his moment. "Mama," Kieran's voice cracked with desperate hope. "You came. I knew you'd come." "Always sweetness," Thera said, her voice gentling, despite the combat adrenaline flooding her system. "I will always come for you." "The princess is unstable," Mordain announced to his recording device, his voice taking on the pompous certainty of someone convinced of their own righteousness. "Observe how she prioritizes individual attachment over societal good. This is the weakness humans introduce: personal emotion over communal responsibility." Personal emotion. Thera's laugh held no humor. "You kidnapped a 5-year-old child and locked him in a cage, and you want to lecture me about appropriate emotion? Here's some personal emotion for you, Mordain." She dropped every control, every learned suppression, every carefully maintained protocol. Her empathic broadcast exploded outward like a detonation carrying everything she'd been holding back since Kale's death. Grief for her husband so profound it felt like drowning. Fear that she was failing as a mother, that she was inadequate, that she would lose Kieran the way she'd lost Kale. Shame that she'd let protocol matter more than connection, that she'd driven her own son to seek comfort from strangers. Rage at Mordain for using her child, for weaponizing Kieran's trust, for turning royal duty into terrorism. And beneath it all, love. Overwhelming, unconditional, fierce maternal love that would burn down the entire palace if that's what it took to keep her son safe. The guards collapsed, not unconscious, but on their knees, overwhelmed by the intensity of emotion that Valeth simply did not broadcast in public. It was considered vulgar, losing control like this. It was beneath a princess, beneath anyone with proper training. Thera didn't care. She was done with proper, done with protocol, done with every rule that prioritized appearance over truth. Mordain staggered back, his elderly system less equipped to handle the empathic assault. "Stop. This is improper. You are royal. You must maintain." "Maintain what?" The words tore from Thera's throat, raw and primal. "Dignity while my son suffers, protocol while you terrorize him. I am done maintaining anything except my child's safety." She reached Kieran's cage, her hands already working the crystal lock mechanism. The barrier dissolved and Kieran launched himself into her arms with enough force to nearly knock her over. She caught him, held him, felt his small body trembling against her chest. And for the first time in months, when she held him, he didn't flinch from her empathic broadcast, because it was finally completely honest. Loud, yes. Overwhelming, absolutely. But real. True. Unfiltered by what she thought she should feel, unrestricted by what protocol demanded she project. Just a mother holding her terrified son and letting him feel exactly how much she loved him. "Mama, you're so loud," Kieran whispered against her shoulder. "But I can hear you now. I can really hear you." Thera's eyes burned with tears she'd been suppressing for solar cycles. "I'm sorry, I was loud in the wrong way before sweetness. I'm so sorry." "It's okay, you're learning. Marcus is teaching you." "Yes," Thera murmured. "Yes, he is." Movement near the entrance. The guards were recovering, struggling to their feet, reaching for weapons. Mordain was rallying them with urgent broadcasts: "Seize them. This proves the princess's instability. Human corruption has made her lose all control." Marcus stepped into the chamber's center, and Thera watched realization dawn on the guards' faces as they finally belatedly registered the alien presence they hadn't been able to perceive empathically. "Actually," Marcus said, his voice calm despite the weapons now pointed in his direction, "I think we're going to prove something very different." He looked at Thera, and she saw the determination in his eyes, saw him preparing for what came next, for the cost he was about to pay. "Get Kieran out," he said quietly. "Take him to the Queen. Let him tell her everything while I make sure Mordain can't spin this." "Marcus, no. Trust me, Your Highness. This is what I'm good at, being a shield so other people can catch their breath." Thera wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, wanted to keep both her son and this impossible human safe. But she could see the tactical logic, could see that separating their objectives, her getting Kieran to safety, Marcus providing irrefutable evidence, gave them the best chance of success. "Don't die," she said, and it came out like an order. "That's not a request, Lieutenant. Don't you dare die proving a point." His smile was brief but genuine. "Yes, ma'am." She ran. Kieran clutched tight in her arms, her empathic senses stretched to their limit, tracking every guard position, every potential threat. Behind her, she heard Mordain shouting orders, heard the guards advancing on Marcus. And then she felt it. Marcus's empathic broadcast no longer contained, no longer quiet, exploding outward like a supernova of human emotion. She'd felt his broadcast before when she'd learned to perceive his frequency. But this was different. This wasn't the carefully modulated sharing of empathic contact. This was everything unfiltered, uncontained, burning across every frequency with enough intensity to make her stumble mid-stride. Fear. Marcus's fear, constant and managed, but absolutely real. He was terrified of failing, of inadequacy, of not being enough when it mattered. But beneath the fear, determination. The choice to act anyway, to protect anyway, to stand between danger and the people who mattered regardless of personal cost. Protectiveness. Overwhelming, bone-deep need to keep Kieran safe, to give Thera the time she needed, to prove that humans weren't threats but allies, to show the Valeth exactly what they'd been missing when they dismissed an entire species as empathically null. Grief, old grief carefully contained from a sister's kidnapping 16 years ago. The memory of helplessness, of hearing Celeste scream over a phone line and being unable to reach her. The promise he'd made to himself then, never freeze again, never fail to protect someone who needs help. And woven through it all, discipline. The extraordinary effort it took to feel all of this and still choose appropriate action. To experience terror and still project calm for others. To carry grief and still offer comfort. To be overwhelmed and still stand as a shield. The guards collapsed again, but this time from empathic overload of a frequency they'd never been trained to process. Their nervous systems couldn't interpret the combination of human emotion and Valeth-style broadcast. It was too alien, too overwhelming, too completely outside their framework of understanding. Mordain staggered, his white ears quivering. Impossible. I hear you. And then Kieran, still pressed against Thera's shoulder, did something remarkable. He amplified Marcus's broadcast, connected it to the human through their empathic bond, able to perceive frequencies adult Veleth had been trained to ignore. Kieran took Marcus's raw emotional truth and projected it outward with a child's unfiltered clarity, boosted it, made it impossible to dismiss or misinterpret. The wave of empathic truth exploded outward from the old palace, racing across crystal canyons, reaching all the way to the palace itself, to the council chambers, where Queen Valorous was meeting with advisors. And every Veleth in range felt it. Marcus Reed's complete, absolute, undeniable lack of aggression toward Kieran. His willingness to die protecting the child. His respect, not manipulation, of Thera. His total absence of agenda beyond keeping a frightened boy safe. And beneath it all, that extraordinary discipline. The proof that humans weren't emotionally null, but rather broadcasting on frequencies Veleth had simply never learned to hear. That their quietness was choice, not deficiency. That their control was strength, not weakness. Thera burst from the old palace into the canyon air. Kieran still clutched tight and nearly collided with the squad of royal guards descending from hover transports. Leading them, her ceremonial robes streaming behind her like captured starlight, was Queen Valorous. The queen's ears were vertical, quivering at the tips, the position Thera had only seen twice in her life, both times when her mother encountered something that fundamentally challenged her understanding of reality. "Mother!" Thera gasped, struggling to catch her breath. Mordain took Kieran. Marcus stayed behind too. "I felt it." Valorous interrupted, her voice carrying a quality Thera had never heard before. Something like awe. "All of us felt it. That human, he is screaming empathically louder than I knew possible. And what he screams is..." She paused, seemed to struggle for words. "Truth, pure undeniable truth." Kieran lifted his head from Thera's shoulder. "Grandmother, the quiet human isn't quiet anymore. He's showing everyone what I already knew. That he's good, that he's safe, that he loves Mama and me." Valorous's eyes, those swirling galaxies that marked the royal bloodline, fixed on her great-grandson. "And you amplified his broadcast. I wanted everyone to hear him the way I hear him, not the wrong way, the right way." The queen was silent for a long moment. Then she turned to her guards. "Secure the building, take Elder Mordain into custody. Any who resist, subdue, but do not harm. And someone extract the human, before he damages himself further. What he is doing, her voice softened, what he is doing should not be possible for a human physiology. The pain must be extraordinary. Thera's heart clenched. She'd been so focused on escape, on getting Kieran to safety, she hadn't fully processed what Marcus was enduring to make this possible. Broadcasting at that intensity, forcing his neurology to do something it had never evolved to handle, it would be like trying to see ultraviolet light with unmodified human eyes. Possible, maybe, but at tremendous cost. "I need to go back," she said. "I need to." "You need to stay with your son," Valera said firmly. "My guards will bring the lieutenant to medical facilities. You have done your part, daughter. Let others do theirs." It went against every instinct, saying, but Thera could feel Kieran trembling against her, could sense his empathic signature cycling through relief and residual fear. He needed her present, needed her focused on him, not split between competing priorities. So she stayed, held her son, watched as royal guards flooded into the old palace, and tried not to imagine what state Marcus would be in when they brought him out. Minutes passed like hours. Then the guards emerged, two of them supporting Marcus between them. His face was sheet white, his eyes unfocused, and blood trickled from his nose in a way that it suggested severe neurological strain. But he was conscious, barely but conscious. Behind them, more guards escorted Mordain. The elder's ears were flat against his skull, his empathic signature broadcasting defeat and something that might have been genuine shame. He'd felt Marcus's truth, felt the absolute absence of deception or malice, and felt his own assumptions crumble in the face of evidence he couldn't deny. Thera moved toward Marcus Kieran, still in her arms but shifting position so he could see. "Lieutenant, that was extraordinarily stupid and extraordinarily brave." Marcus's unfocused eyes found hers. He tried to smile, manage something close. "Stupid and brave. Story of my life, Your Highness. You proved it, proved everything. Every Valith in the capital felt your broadcast. They know now. Know that humans aren't null, aren't threats, aren't manipulators." "Good." His voice slurred slightly, speech centers struggling under neurological stress. "Because I really don't want to have to do that again. Ever. That was worse than I thought it would be." Queen Valorous approached, and even the guards supporting Marcus straightened to attention at her presence. She studied the human for a long moment, her expression cycling through emotions too complex for easy interpretation. "Lieutenant Marcus Reed," she said finally, her voice carrying harmonics of profound respect. "I am stunned." There it was, the word from the title that had started this entire catastrophe. Even the Queen was stunned. "That is a word I rarely have cause to use," Valorous continued, "but I find no other adequate. You have just broadcast empathic truth with a purity and intensity that exceeds many Velith. You have allowed us to perceive not just your emotions, but your absolute lack of malice, your extraordinary discipline, your genuine care for beings you have known for less than 3 solar cycles." She paused. "You have fundamentally altered my understanding of what humans are capable of, and you have paid a significant price to do so." Marcus swayed slightly, and the guards tightened their grip. "Your Majesty, Kieran needed help. Princess Thera needed support. Sometimes you do what needs doing, consequences be damned." Indeed, something that might have been a smile touched the Queen's face. "You will be taken to our finest medical facility. You will receive treatment for the neurological damage you have inflicted upon yourself. And when you have recovered, you will be formally recognized as honored protector of the royal bloodline. That is not a request, Lieutenant. That is a decree." What? "You have proven yourself willing to die for my great-grandson. That creates bonds deeper than blood in Valith culture. You are family now, whether you intended it or not." Thera felt warmth expand in her chest, felt Kieran's empathic signature brighten with joy. "Marcus is family. He gets to stay." "He stays," Valorous confirmed, "if he is willing." Marcus looked at Thera, and despite the obvious pain he was in, despite the blood still trickling from his nose, his eyes held absolute certainty. "I'm willing. If the princess wants me here, if Kieran needs me, I'm willing." "We want you," Kieran said immediately. "We need you. Please stay." Thera met Marcus's gaze, and something passed between them. Not romance, there was still too much healing, needed too much to navigate. But understanding, partnership, the recognition that they'd been thrust together by impossible circumstances and had somehow against all odds become something that mattered to each other. Stay, she said softly. We're a strange family, but I think we're figuring out how to be a good one. Best kind, Marcus murmured. Then his eyes rolled back and he collapsed completely. The guards caught him, began moving immediately toward the waiting transport. Valorous issued rapid orders, medical teams on standby, neurological specialists from the university, full monitoring and support until his human physiology stabilized. Thera watched them load Marcus into the transport, watched it lift into the air toward the palace medical facilities, and felt Kieran's small hand pat her cheek. He'll be okay, Mama. I can still feel him. His broadcast is quieter now, but it's there. He's just sleeping. I hope you're right, sweetness. I am. I can hear him remember. I hear all of him now. They returned to the palace in Queen Valeris's personal transport, the crystal canyons falling away beneath them as they rose toward the royal district. Through the viewport, Thera could see the city spreading out in all directions, thousands of Valeth going about their lives, all of them still processing the empathic broadcast that had reached across the capital like a seismic wave. The human wasn't null, wasn't empty, wasn't threat. He was just different. Indifferent. Thera was learning wasn't wrong. Just different. The High Council convened 6 hours later in emergency session. Thera stood before them, Kieran at her side, and watched as Queen Valeris presented the evidence. The recording Mordain had been making interrupted mid-fiction. The testimony of the guards who'd perceived Marcus's broadcast. The medical scans showing what forcing a human neurology to broadcast Valith-style empathy did to brain function, damage that would take weeks to fully heal pain that Marcus had endured willingly to prove his intentions. And Kieran's testimony, delivered with a child's absolute honesty, the quiet human came because I was scared. He stayed because Mama needed help. He got hurt because he wanted you all to hear him the way I hear him. He's good. He's family. And anyone who says different doesn't know how to listen right. The vote when it came was overwhelming 89 in favor of the amended Cultural Exchange Treaty, 24 against, 3 abstentions. The Human Velith Cultural Exchange was approved. Marcus Reed was formally recognized as honored protector and granted permanent residency. And Elder Mordain, once he recovered from the empathic shock of perceiving Marcus's absolute truth, would face council justice for kidnapping the heir and attempting to frame an innocent being for political gain. Thera felt something in her chest that she hadn't experienced in years' hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope of someone drowning, the solid, grounded hope of someone who'd found footing again. She visited the medical facility as soon as the council session ended. Marcus was in a private recovery chamber connected to monitoring equipment that looked almost comically oversized for his human frame. His eyes were closed, his breathing steady, and the medical staff assured her that his neurological functions were stabilizing. She stood beside his bed, Kieran held against her hip, and looked at the human who'd changed everything. Thank you, she whispered, knowing he couldn't hear but needing to say it anyway. Thank you for seeing what I couldn't. Thank you for protecting my son. Thank you for teaching me that love doesn't have to be louder to be real. Kieran reached out, placed his small hand on Marcus's arm. The empathic contact was gentle, barely a whisper. Sleep well, quiet human. We'll be here when you wake up. And they were. 3 days later, when Marcus finally opened his eyes fully alert, the first thing he saw was Thera, sitting in a chair beside his bed, reading from a data pad, while Kieran played quietly on the floor with holographic puzzles. Domestic, peaceful, family. Hey, Marcus said, his voice rough from disuse. Thera's head snapped up, her ears perking forward with relief. Lieutenant, welcome back. How long was I out? 72 hours. You gave the medical staff quite a scare. Apparently humans aren't supposed to broadcast empathically. Something about your neural pathways not being designed for that kind of output. Yeah, I got that impression. He tried to sit up, winced. Everything hurts. That's new. That's the price of becoming a bridge between species. Thera set down her data pad, moved to sit on the edge of his bed. The Queen has officially named you Honored Protector. Your family now, Valeth family, which comes with benefits and complications in roughly equal measure. Marcus absorbed that. And you, how do you feel about having a human in your family? Thera was quiet for a moment, considering. 6 days ago, my son ran away from me to hide behind you. I thought it was the worst moment of my life. Proof that I'd failed at the only thing that truly mattered. And now I think it was the best thing that could have happened, because it forced me to stop performing motherhood and start actually being a mother. It forced me to learn a new language of love. Your language. The quiet one. I'm not that quiet anymore, Marcus pointed out. Pretty sure I screamed my emotional truth across half the planet. Once, as a choice, as a sacrifice. But your default is still quiet, still contained, still choosing not to burden others with your pain. She reached out carefully, placed her hand over his. Empathic contact, deliberate and gentle. That's what Kieran needed, what I needed. Someone who could show us that control isn't the same as absence. That quiet can be a gift instead of a void. Marcus turned his hand palm up, let her fingers rest against his. Your Highness, Thera, just Thera. We're family now. Remember, families use names. Thera, then. He smiled, tired but genuine. I came here to stand in a corner and look intimidating. Ended up accidentally revolutionizing interspecies empathic understanding. Life's weird. Indeed, but good weird. He looked at Kieran, who had abandoned his puzzles and was now climbing up to sit on the bed beside them. Looked at Thera, who was learning to love at the right volume. Looked at the impossible situation they had all found themselves in and somehow navigated successfully. Yeah, Marcus said. Good weird. Kieran settled between them, small body relaxed in a way Thera had despaired of ever seeing again. Are you staying forever, Marcus? Mama says you're honored protector now. That means you can't leave. It doesn't mean I can't leave, Marcus corrected gently. It means I'm choosing not to. There's a difference. Why choose to stay? Marcus looked at Thera and she saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke it. Because you two need someone quiet around. And because being part of a strange family is better than being alone in a normal one. 3 months later, Thera stood in front of a classroom of young Velith, ages 15 to 25 in human equivalent, and began her lecture on cross-species empathic perception. You have been taught, she said, her voice carrying the harmonics of instruction, that empathy is the broadcast and reception of emotional truth across specific frequencies. You have been taught that beings who do not broadcast on those frequencies are empathically null. Today we begin unlearning that assumption. She gestured and a holographic display materialized showing comparative brain scans of Velith and human neurology. Humans feel everything we feel. Fear, love, grief, joy, determination. But their neurology broadcasts these emotions on different frequencies. Frequencies we have systematically trained ourselves to ignore in favor of cultural conformity. One student, Willa 17 solar cycles with bright green ears that marked her youth, raised her hand. Princess Thera, if humans broadcast on frequencies we ignore, how did Prince Kieran perceive the human's emotional state when adult Velith could not? Because Kieran had not yet been trained to filter his perception. His empathic sense was still raw, unrefined, open to all frequencies. He could hear the quiet human because he hadn't learned to only listen for loud broadcasts. She pulled up another image Marcus Reed neural activity highlighted during his deliberate broadcast at the Old Palace. Lieutenant Reed proved that humans are capable of broadcasting on Velith frequencies, but the cost to their physiology is severe. He damaged his own nervous system to show us what we'd been missing, to prove that our assumptions were wrong. The class sat in attentive silence, their ears angled forward with focused interest. This was the fifth cohort Thera had taught, and each one had responded with the same mixture of fascination and shame. Fascination at the new understanding, shame that their entire culture had been systematically deaf to an entire species. After class, Thera walked the palace gardens with Marcus, who had insisted on attending her lecture despite his continued recovery from the neurological damage. His human physiology was healing but slowly, and the medical staff had warned that he might never fully recover his pre-broadcast cognitive baseline. He said it was worth it, that proving humans weren't threats was worth a few percentage points of processing speed. Thera thought he was an idiot, a brave, selfless idiot who'd fundamentally changed her world. Your mother wants to formalize the arrangement, she said as they walked past crystalline flowers that chimed in the breeze. Official title, diplomatic status, full integration into the royal household. What does that mean exactly? It means you're not just Kieran's protector. You're officially recognized as part of our family structure. Not legally, a father veleth law doesn't work that way, and I think we both agree that's premature at best. But honored guardian, someone who has rights and responsibilities toward Kieran's upbringing. Marcus was quiet processing. And you, how do you feel about that? Thera stopped walking, turned to face him fully. I think I need to ask you something first. Us, working together, raising Kieran, building these cross-cultural programs. Is it just partnership, or is it becoming something more? She'd been wanting to ask for weeks, but hadn't found the courage. Hadn't wanted to complicate an already complicated situation. But the question sat between them like a living thing, and avoiding it was becoming more difficult than confronting it. Marcus met her gaze steadily. Honestly, I don't know. I care about you. I care about Kieran. But we're different species from different worlds with completely different ways of processing emotion and connection. I don't know if what I feel translates to what you would call romance or if it's just deep respect and partnership. That's fair. Thera's ears shifted to a position of thoughtful consideration. I don't know either. I know I value your presence. I know Kieran needs you. I know that when I think about the future, you're in it. But whether that's romantic or familial or some human veleth hybrid we don't have words for yet, I think we're still figuring that out. Is that okay to not know? I think it has to be. We're writing new rules here, Marcus, building something that's never existed before. Maybe it's okay to take our time, to let whatever this is develop naturally instead of forcing it into familiar categories. Marcus smiled, reached out to brush his fingers against hers. Not quite holding hands, but connection. I can work with that. They continued walking, and Thera felt something settle in her chest. Not resolution exactly, but acceptance. They would figure out what they were to each other. Eventually, for now it was enough to be partners in the strange adventure of cross-species family building. Kieran found them in the gardens an hour later, running full speed with his attendants, chasing behind and calling for him to slow down. Be careful, remember his dignity. He ignored them all, launched himself at Marcus with the absolute confidence of a child who knew he'd be caught. Marcus caught him, lifted him up, and Kieran's laughter rang through the garden like music. Quiet human mama, I learned a new empathic technique today. Want to see always sweetness, Thera said. Kieran concentrated, his small face serious, and broadcast a carefully controlled wave of affection toward both of them. Not overwhelming, not loud, just gentle and warm and perfect. That's wonderful, Thera breathed. That's exactly right. You're learning to control your volume. Just like you, Kieran said proudly. You're getting quieter too, Mama. Marcus is teaching both of us. Marcus set Kieran down, ruffled his head fur gently. You're both teaching me too, buddy. Teaching me that quiet isn't the only way to love someone. Sometimes you need to be loud. Sometimes you need to let people hear everything you feel. Like at the old palace. Yeah, like that. But hopefully never again because that hurt like hell. Marcus said a bad word, Kieran announced gleefully. Marcus is recovering from severe neurological trauma and gets a pass on language, Thera said, but she was smiling. Go wash up for dinner. We're eating in the family quarters tonight. Kieran ran off attendants, trailing behind, and Thera and Marcus stood together in the garden as the moons rose over the Crystal Palace. Family quarters, Marcus said. That's new. Mother suggested it, said that if you're going to be honored guardian, you should have quarters adjacent to ours, so you're available when Kieran needs you, and when you need me. Thera's ears shifted, carrying meaning she wasn't quite ready to speak aloud. That too. They walked back toward the palace together, not quite touching, but close enough that their empathic signatures, one loud and learning to be quieter, one quiet, and learning when to be loud, and overlapped in the space between them. Different frequencies, different languages, different ways of being, but finding harmony anyway. That night, after Kieran was asleep and the attendants had been dismissed, Thera stood in her quarters and looked out at the city spread below. Somewhere down there, humans and Valith were beginning the slow work of learning to understand each other, beginning to build bridges across frequencies they'd never known existed. And it had started here, with a frightened child, a confused mother, and a human who'd been quiet enough to let them both catch their breath. Her communicator chimed, message from Marcus, whose quarters were now just down the hall. Kieran's asleep, checked on him, he's smiling. I think we're doing okay. Thera smiled, typed back. We're doing better than okay, we're doing something new. Thank you for teaching me how. Thank you for being willing to learn. See you at breakfast. Try not to exist too vigorously before then. She laughed, the sound surprising her. When had she last laughed, really laughed? Not the polite social laughter of royal functions, but genuine amusement at something absurd and warm and real. Before Kael's death, probably. Before grief had convinced her that joy was inappropriate for a widow, that strength meant suppressing everything light and choosing only duty. But Marcus was teaching her something else. That strength could include joy, that duty could coexist with laughter, that loving someone didn't mean broadcasting at maximum volume. Sometimes it meant turning down the signal enough that they could actually hear you. The moons hung in the alien sky. In the room next door, her son slept peacefully for the first time in months. Down the hall, a human who'd become family, despite every cultural barrier, reviewed reports, and probably worried about whether he was doing enough. And Thera stood at the window, learning to be loud when it mattered and quiet when it didn't, and thought that maybe possibly they were all going to be okay. Different species, different frequencies, different ways of loving, but finding each other anyway, one quiet moment at a time. In the communications room, a message was being transmitted to Earth, 3-hour delay for the distance. Hey Cece, remember how I said this posting was boring? I lied. Or rather, it stopped being boring about a week ago. Long story involving an alien prince, his mother and me accidentally proving that humans have feelings. You'd be horrified and amused in equal measure. Miss you, love you, tell you everything when communication lag doesn't make conversation impossible. P.S. I think I'm staying here permanently. Hope that's okay. Your idiot brother, Mark. 3 hours later, Celeste Reed's response would arrive. Mark, you absolute disaster. Only you could turn a ceremonial security posting into becoming alien royalty's emotional translator. Mom would be proud. I'm proud. Also laughing. A lot. Stay safe, be happy, and for the love of everything, send pictures of the alien kid. I need to see what a 5-year-old prince looks like. Love, Cece. But that was later. For now, in the quiet of the Velith night, a strange family was learning to speak each other's languages. Learning that different didn't mean wrong. Learning that love could be loud or quiet broadcast, or contained, overwhelming or gentle, and all of it could be real. Learning most of all that sometimes the best families were the ones you built from impossible circumstances, one careful choice at a time. The palace lights dimmed for the sleep cycle. 3 moons cast their light across crystal spires. And in the royal quarters, a mother, a son, and a quiet human who taught them both how to breathe found peace in the spaces between words, in the harmony of different frequencies, finally learning to hear each other. Good weird indeed.